The Bob Murphy Show, episode 366.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. We have another crossover. This time, Adam Heyman and I are discussing the recent feud over the term woke right. So I don't need to give more of a preamble here, since once Adam and I get going, after we do our jokey stuff, we spell it all out from scratch if you don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I think for those of you who do know what I'm talking about, let me assure you, even if you thought, oh yeah, I followed this stuff, and I'm telling you, we get into some things that I have not seen fully dissected, put it that way. So as usual, we are late in the conversation because of the timing and how Adam and I have to first meet, and then it takes a bit to process these things and whatnot. But I do still think that if you're interested in this topic, our discussion will take it deeper than you've seen thus far. And of course, we're extremely fair and balanced. Here it is, my conversation with Adam Heyman on the recent feud over the term woke right.
Hello, Bob Murphy.
Hello, Adam Heyman.
How are you doing today, good sir?
This, as I mentioned before we started here, this is the third podcast I'm recording. Basically, I think there should be some labor laws that may need to be examined, because I think I'm being exploited at this point.
Call your local congressman. You're just an animal. I can only assume that you just feel a burning desire to get all the wisdom out of your brain before it's too late or something.
That is true. And I do want to get it in there, so at least, GPT-7, I think at that point we'll be training on all of my material, and we'll at least
nothing
know
else.
That.
And nothing else.
Yes, right.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today, but I don't know if my voice is. It's a little rough, and it's kind of your fault. A long time ago, you and I, maybe the first time we met at a Mises Summit, there was karaoke afterwards, and I said, hey, Bob, you sing great. It's a shame I can't sing like that. And I believe you said something like, just try stuff, pick stuff, follow your heart. Well, I was at Providence, Rhode Island over the weekend at a Libertarian National Committee meeting, and we got everything done in a 2-day meeting in one day, and went out later that evening at a bar with karaoke. And Bob, I went for it. I went for it so hard I can hardly speak. Here it is, Tuesday.
I think back, and that's a touching thing, and I'm glad I encouraged you. That was almost like a Disney movie there. There was a time, it was, what the heck was the event? It was some kind of thing in New York. I forget what it was, but then Tatiana led a contingent of us out, and I did Oh Darling, the Beatles song. And I hit it. The guy was like trying to talk Rothbardian stuff to me, and he waited for me to do the song. And then I was done. He was like, wow, that was impressive. And I can't do that now. There was a point when somebody later on said, hey, what's, Swing for the Fences? And I said, oh, this one. And I went to go do it. And my vocal cords said, no, you need to retire that one.
Finally, after many decades, your left testicle dropped and you can no longer.
We're going to save that for the healthcare episode.
All right. So who are you feuding with this week?
I thought it's not so much I was feuding. I did have some zingers that I inserted in there, trolls/jokes. But this whole idea of the woke right, and as normal folks, we're a little bit behind the curve here, but that just gives us the chance to weigh all of the contributions, and then we give the final word and summarize the debate for posterity.
That's right. We are the exclamation on your Twitter wars. Exclamation point. Exclamation point.
I thought you were just trying to spare your voice there. And
right, as few words as possible.
Yeah, yes. So I don't know, who do you want me to start saying some stuff, or do you want to let people in and who might not be privileged to be on Twitter 24/7?
I'm on a 250 word count for this whole episode, so you better go.
Okay. So big picture, folks, for a while. So the quick thing is there were people arguing about this term woke right. And that's the focus of what we're going to talk about. Just to give some of the backstory, for a while, but particularly after October 7th, Dave Smith was complaining about the American right-wingers, and not all of them, but like a subset of the American right, people, calling themselves conservatives primarily, who were adopting a lot of tactics of the woke left. And so I think Dave, referred to them. So like, hey, it's like they're the woke right on this stuff. And the specific criteria he had in mind were things like, group identity and a victimhood mentality and an oppressed and oppressor, and that anybody who criticizes what the Israeli government was doing in response to October 7th is like, hey, you're kind of bombing a lot of kids there in Gaza and whatnot. That it was like, oh, don't you remember the Holocaust? Are you anti-Semitic? And then even beyond that, once the stuff with the college pros, I mean, there were, wasn't there like a president or two? I forget now I'm forgetting it, but like got fired because of the way they handled that. And so, and there's lots of, Ben Shapiro and people like that cheering that. And so Dave's point was, who does that remind you of? People that in a perfectly straightforward debate will just start calling the other person, saying they're racist in some sense and calling to get them fired, and certainly, not allowing them to speak on social media and bringing up historical injustices and saying, no, this group by definition can't be in the wrong because do you see the awful things that historically happened to them? And he said, who does that remind you of? Well, isn't that just the left? Except the difference is here, it's not, American blacks and slavery, it's Jews and the Holocaust. And that's kind of the two things. So that's what he was using for a while. And then more recently, I don't know when he started doing it, but James Linsday started using the term woke right. And then, what's the guy's name? Konstantin Kisin, I think is the guy's name, picked it up and were saying a certain segment of the right, but they were referring to like the Christian nationalists, I guess is a way we could refer to them, and say, oh no, they're the woke right. And they were using their own set of criteria to try to dismiss them. And so anyway, I don't know why it came to a head, but for whatever reason, that argument really blew up like the last 2 weeks as we're sitting here now recording, Adam. And I thought it would be useful for us to jump in. I got one quick thing I'll say, and then I'll turn over to you. Something that was like a huge event in this exchange that then I think is what made me say to you, I think we got to cover this as a topic when we do the next crossover, was James Linsday, under a fake name, got a Christian nationalist online, website to publish what he claimed was the Communist Manifesto, just, changed to, instead of it being communism, it was promoting Christian nationalism. And they published it, and gotcha. And the reason that was so ironic is James Linsday got famous. He was one of the 3 people that were part of the so-called grievance studies hoax. I think it was back in 2018 was when they were doing all that stuff. And that, one of the funnier things that was reported at the time is they took sections of Mein Kampf, changed it to make it a feminist thing instead of a, pro-Aryan thing, and anti-man instead of anti-Jew, and got some feminist journal to publish, like a peer-reviewed feminist journal. And that was like one of the great feathers in their cap at the time. So now James is saying, look what I just did, you idiots. If you liked me back then when I tricked, the woke left into publishing Mein Kampf, now that I tricked the woke right into publishing the Communist Manifesto, what more do I need to do to show you I'm right and you guys are just as bad, or not just as bad, but you're doing the same thing as the left and you refuse to listen to me, right? So anyway, that's part of what's going on here, and that's what we're talking about, folks. What do you have to say for yourself, Adam?
Down to 189 words. Yeah, I always thought that was the weakest of what the trio did. Helen Pluckrose, Peter Boghossian, I think, and James Linsday. they got 7 of their 20 attempted articles published, and I think they were on track to publish a few more before.
Can I just stop you? Just so folks, Adam here is referring back to the way these guys got on the map in the culture battles. He's talking about what happened in, was it 2018-ish?
Something like that.
When
yeah.
they came, yeah.
And anyway, of the fake articles that they got published, I thought the one referencing Mein Kampf was the weakest, because if you believe that oppression is a thing, and of course it is, I would assume there'd be some similarities that would easily be transposed between how Hitler thought the Jews had, destroyed Germany, and then whatever the latest or most awkward narratives about the patriarchy are. I mean, it certainly, it would seem obvious that those would map, right? I don't think that's very weird.
Right. So let me just see if I can find it here. I pulled it up on my, I thought I had it on my computer, but I think I got it on my phone. So yes, on that point. Okay. So I want to make sure I don't forget this. So in the current battle, the argument has been that, James Linsday said, I got this journal, or this, it wasn't a journal, it was a website. And that's one thing too. I have literally never heard of this publication, of this website, I should say, that publishes original articles, that James Linsday tricked into publishing the Communist Manifesto. So I literally have never heard, I'm not like making fun of those guys. And even those guys, when they responded to the hoax, that was one of the first things they said is like, oh, our humble little, website here, apparently now we represent, the hordes of Christian nationalists. You know what I mean? So they were even kind of admitting, what are you talking about, James Linsday? We're not like, the leading the vanguard of the revolution here. So there was that element. Some of the guys I have heard of. I'm not saying they're complete unknown, but I'm just saying James Linsday, and this is part of what Dave Smith's critique was of his, and as Dave and James are, going to war with each other over this stuff, is when he's doing interviews and things, and certainly Konstantin Kissin's position, they're talking a lot about like Tucker Carlson and maybe Candace Owens. And so you're thinking like, oh, that's who they mean. And then when you say, give me specifics, like what, and then they point to some obscure website that I've never heard of. Okay. So, you know what I mean? Instead of just saying, oh, well, the reason Candace Owens is woke is because, you know what I mean? Or and so anyway, so there's that element of it. And then also even on its own terms, like Mike Cernovich was really making hay with this. To his credit, when James Linsday, published his post on this saying, I tricked him, he gave like the side by side to show these were the passages from the Communist Manifesto that I started with, and then this is what I submitted, and then the journal kind of tweaked it a little bit. And even, and he had like a track changes on the Word document, and it was mostly just all red. And so Cernovich's point was to say, what are you talking about? He completely rewrote it. I think that's a little bit overstating, like certainly the beginning, how it starts like there's a specter haunting Europe, and then James changed it to, there's a spirit haunting America or something like that. But even that, it's not woke to say there's a threat looming. You know what I mean? Like that's a pretty vague. So I agree, if you go into it knowing, oh, you know what, this was the Communist Manifesto and he tweaked it and these guys published it, it does look like, hey, maybe you guys should have recognized this. But I don't know that I would have if I hadn't been primed. Okay, so there's that element. So then what I was curious, and this is, going back to what you were saying, Adam, and I thought, and some other people were saying this too, was like, we just kind of took it for granted back in 2018 when James and Peter and Helen Pluckrose were like high-fiving each other, and one of the things was, they got this stupid feminist journal to publish Mein Kampf, what a bunch of and I wondered, is that actually fair? Like, did it, and I went and looked, and so let me just read to you folks the abstract. So the title is Our Struggle is My Struggle, right? So right there you can say, see, like, Mein Kampf means my struggle. Solidarity feminism is an intersectional reply to neoliberal and choice feminism. Let me just read the first couple sentences. In 2005, so again, folks, this is the article that allegedly was James Linsday and his other two hoaxers back then when they were going against the left, and that's why the right loved them at the time, tricked a feminist journal into publishing sections of Mein Kampf. That's the way, we all took it, and good job, guys. And this is the article in question. In 2005, Linda Hirschman coined the controversial term choice feminism, which she went on to develop and problematize in her 2006 book, Get to Work, A Manifesto for Women of the World. For Hirschman, choice feminism claims that whatever a woman freely chooses is intrinsically feminist. Choices available to a feminist under choice feminism include, in her words, decisions to work, stay home, have 10 children. Okay, I'll stop there. So do you see right out of the bat, or right off the bat, right out of the chute, the way they got this to be relevant for a feminist journal is they were referring to, I assume these, the references are true, to a specific book that had a controversy. You know what I mean? It's not like it started out and said, we need to round up 6 million men and gas them, right? And this was actually Mein Kampf and we just changed men for Jews. You know what I mean? Which is kind of what you thought. So I'm saying even right there in its own terms, and if you'll permit me, Adam, it's good that your voice is bad because I don't feel bad enough for talking so much. I posted this, when I was doing prep for this show, folks, and I went through that. I was like, what the heck? And by the way, it's supposed to be from chapter 12 of Mein Kampf. That's what, was said at the time. So I went and I know since I'm an Austrian associated with the Mises Institute, people think that I'm actually a big Hitler guy. I have actually never read much of Mein Kampf. And so I had to go look up and see what the heck is chapter 12 of and it's, he doesn't even say Jew for a while, for what that's worth. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like a history of here's what happened and this government betrayed. And then, eventually it gets into what's called the stab in the back theory and how the Jewish people who were running the German government were the ones that sold us out and blah, blah, blah. And, so anyway, but it's not like what you would have thought in terms of like a bunch of crazy, we got to do all this stuff and we got to put these people down and put stars on them and then, put them in the ghetto. It's not like that. You know what I mean? It's just kind of boring, frankly. And in any event, I skimmed that and then I looked at this academic paper on fem and I couldn't even see what the alleged connection was. So I tweeted and I said, I'm trying to determine whether we should be saying James Linsday et al. Tricked a feminist journal into publishing Mein Kampf. In the next tweet, I'll link the actual article, which is ostensibly from chapter 12. But it's nothing like at least volume 1, chapter 12 is a different volume. And so I'm just was crowdsourcing and just saying, can anyone even explain to me how prima facie back then this feminist journal, was tricked into public? And so then somebody ran it through Claude, the LLM, and I'll just read that. And I think it's very telling. Okay. So don't worry, Adam, I'm almost done. So here's what Claude said when this guy, I think it was a guy, gave it James, the hoaxer's feminist article, and then, also chapter 12 from Mein Kampf, and just said, can you compare these and are they similar? And then, so Claude said, original text discusses how, quote, the great mass of German workers had been poisoned by the Marxian doctrine, and their task was to, quote, break this spell to root out this doctrine and replace it with a new one. The hoax paper similarly argues that choice/neoliberal feminism has poisoned feminism and must be replaced with solidarity feminism, using almost identical rhetorical structure about breaking away from a corrupting ideology. The original emphasizes the need to appeal to workers rather than intellectuals. The hoax paper emphasizes appealing to all oppressed groups rather than privileged feminist intellectuals. Both text, and then it's going to list 1, 2, 3, 4 different criteria, and then I'll stop there, guys. So both texts, so it's going to list 4 reasons Claude is saying that these two things are very similar. 1, warn about the movement being co-opted by self-interested parties. 2, call for absolute commitment to core principles. 3, emphasize the need for unified action over individual/fractured approaches. And 4, position themselves as the true path forward against corrupting ideologies. Okay, so I'll stop there. And this person, I don't know if it's the person's name is Sandy and their profile picture is like a dog, so I don't know if it's a woman or a man. I don't know if they thought like, yeah, Bob, what are you talking about? This is clearly what the similarity, or if they just meant, well, this is what Claude said, I can see. But my point is, again, let me just really quickly go over that list. Both of these texts warn about the movement being co-opted by self-interested parties, call for absolute commitment to core principles, emphasize the need for unified action over individual fractured approaches, position themselves as the true path forward against corrupting ideologies. Say what you will about those 4 things, but if I had just in a vacuum said, when you call somebody like the woke right and say, oh yeah, they're just like the woke left, why are you saying that? What do you have in mind? Nobody would have listed any of those 4 things. They might have said the stuff like that Dave said, calling people racist, just referring to, the historical oppressor, oppressed, blah, blah, blah. Notice that was none of that there. And also, Claude was not saying, well, a lot of these sentences were identical except for some adjectives, or, you know what I mean? it was just the rhetorical style. So I'm saying I think it's unfair that kind of went down in history among the right wingers as, we tricked that feminist journal. When again, as I showed you folks, their introduction was to refer to a recent feminist publication and then go from there. So it's not like Hitler in his prison cell was saying, I think in the distant future there will be a feminist publication, or even saying in the recent past there was this publication. That's not, you know what I mean? So again, anyway, you get my point, I think, on that.
I totally get your point, and I got to say that back when the hoax originally happened, I was one of those that was cheering. Yay, you made them all look stupid or whatever. But looking back, what really happened is a bunch of really smart people spent a whole many hours learning these disciplines, and then they wrote some papers that passed muster. And the mockery isn't that they fooled any editors. It's that, I mean, these fields are just jokes. They have gobbledygook concepts, and they do all the bad things that come from having, identity politics and a victimhood mentality. But it's not so surprising that a smart mathematician can learn feminism and write a feminist article. And if he cribbed from an ancient paper by a racist that, talks about oppression, I mean, that's those things, again, they should track. That doesn't make any, but to give the devil his due, it was amazing that the hoax brought so much attention to these fields of supposed academia that really ought to be discredited. And whereas, you or Tom or anybody else on some dry podcast might take one of these legitimate articles apart, or doctoral theses or whatever, and just start making fun of it, that only goes so far. But you got to admit that they made a national splash with the way they did it. It's just a shame that they, that they phrased it as having fooled the editors. That's not what they did. What makes this thing so meaningful is, okay, you can see that the papers we wrote are gibberish, especially, rape culture in a dog park, promoting the patriarchy or some nonsense. It's not that they fooled the editors into getting a bogus paper in a prestigious journal. It's that these papers legit passed muster. This is what this whole field of academia is like. And if this makes sense to them, well, then all the other ones, are just as bad, or could be just as bad.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. And in fairness, maybe we, if you really wanted to bend over backwards to make sure we're not misrepresenting, if we went back and looked at like what Helen, by the way, I should just say before I forget, Helen Pluckrose parted ways with James. I don't know if she was friends with Peter but at some point, like, she kind of distanced herself from at least from James, and James kind of started out more mild-mannered, and then just kind of, I don't know if it was the fame got to him or he just always had the quirky sense of humor, but kind of turned into like just, trolling bomb thrower on Twitter and whatever. And so, like I say, at some point, I know Helen kind of officially broke from him and said, yeah, I don't endorse what James has been doing since we kind of got famous together. I always thought she was really very well spoken and sharp. So maybe they wouldn't, they might, what you just said, Adam, they might say, yeah, that's what we always claimed it was. It was our fans that took it and ran with it and said, what they showed was XYZ, and that's not how we framed it. It could be.
Never, ever, ever let a nerd get too much social clout. That's what the beatings are for, folks.
Yes.
It's for social unity. You know how they get.
You get rid of the swirlies without knowing why did the swirlies exist.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes. Hayek warned us.
Famous dictum.
Can I say, Adam, I had a post, this will be a bit of a pat myself on the back, but also a confession. So I think, again, the hoax stuff came to light. And part of the backstory, folks, is, as Adam said, I think they had written 20 articles and had them all out for submission. Was it 7? Was that the number?
Yeah, 7 got published, and some were still going through the process.
Yes, and then there were some that were outright rejections, but then there were a couple different independent people who were catching on to them, and I think the specific thing that made them give it up was there was a Wall Street Journal reporter who flat out asked them, are you guys, is this your real identity? Because it looks like we're one, and then they decided not to lie, and that's when they just, disclosed everything. And so then the remaining ones that were still under consideration, of course, didn't get published. and then the other ones like retracted it or whatever they did. And so so I think it was in 2020 that whole episode just intrigued me, and I was playing with it like I couldn't decide, what does it really prove? And so I did an episode of the Bob Murphy Show, which we'll link to here, folks. I think it was actually in like March of 2020 or something, where I finally just revisited that and did it. And I was somewhat skeptical. And for example, just to give an idea, as I said, suppose someone didn't believe in proof by contradiction in terms of math, and they thought that was goofy, and they wrote a proof of some, unresolved theorem in math, submitted to a math journal and got it published, and then said, guess what, guys? I don't believe in proof by contradiction. I fooled you. The other mathematicians would just say, okay, well, it's a valid proof, so we're still going to use it. You know what I mean? And so that wouldn't prove anything. And so as you mentioned, the dog park thing, one of the ones that was the most famous besides the Mein Kampf one was the rape dog park thing, where they claimed that they had documented like 10,000 examples or something like that, where they claimed they went to a dog park and looked to see, it was something like, if a male dog is humping a female dog without consent, do the owners allow that to go more than if a male dog tries to hump another male dog without consent? And do the owners kind of you know what I mean? So that was funny. But the point was, they just made up a bunch of empirical observations and submitted that. And so there, I was like, well, maybe the journal is publishing that. So what I'm saying is, what I tried to do in that episode is say, could I, if I'm an editor, like there were some libertarian and Austrian economics journals that I'm a referee for, and could we be caught in a similar thing? And I was saying, if someone just sent in a thing saying, Murray Rothbard's awesome, private property and military defense, and that was the whole article, like we wouldn't publish that. If they made some novel argument and showed how market forces could do it, and it resolved something and like made me think more about, oh yeah, that really could work to have privatized defense, and we published it, and then the person said, I'm really Brad DeLong, I used a pseudonym, you idiots, a free market and private defense wouldn't work, you dorks. I would just say, well, yeah, I believe you that you don't believe in this, but I don't regret publishing that. You made a good contribution. And then if you sent in anecdotes and said, I interviewed a bunch of Iraq war vets, and they showed me all these cases where, the military was stupid and the private contractors were more efficient, and you idiots published it, but I just made that all up. I would say, well, yeah, if you just make stuff up and you're lying, the referee process can't stop that. So, yeah, anyway, the admission, though, Adam, is when I had that episode, it did fairly well or whatever, and then later, for whatever reason, James Linsday got more famous. And then I was sort of like, ooh, is this going to come back to bite me, that now that he's big and I was kind of poo-pooing his thing when he wasn't that big, you know what I mean? But now that it's flipped the other way, now I'm like, yeah, I was totally onto this guy way back then. So that's how it goes.
Moving back to the present, are we happy with the definitions being used of woke and then woke right as being, based on identitarian things and victimhood and silencing people and cancel culture and all that? I mean, that has to be a somewhat vague and fuzzy term, but are we satisfied that all participants are using basically the same definition and that it is sound enough?
Okay, so great question, Adam. I've spelled out what Dave Smith had in mind when he was using it. And by the way, so part of what's going on in this debate is there are a lot of people on the right, and they're objecting to this, and they're calling themselves things like, the dissident right or the alt-right even, that's a term that's been around for a while. And their claim is, yeah, guys like Linsday, and I should mention, what was interesting when I went back and reviewed, the hoax stuff from a few years ago, is at the time, when Helen Pluckrose and Peter Boghossian and James Linsday got famous for that episode, they were telling everybody, in the post-game shows that, hey, we're not rabid right-wingers. We're actually left. They either said leftist or liberals, right? And I think, like I said, I think Helen actually is more of a
liberals,
leftist.
I think.
Yeah. And what I mean, though, Adam, I'm not saying I can't remember the term. I'm saying I think I saw both, depending on who was talking. And so,
well, I think, I think it's a function of the same thing. They were saying, however long ago this was, 8 or 9 years, that that much like Elon and Glenn Greenwald now, they've always held the same
Right.
positions of what they think
Right.
being a leftist is, and the left has just gone careening off a cliff to the point where they don't recognize it anymore, and that's what they're pushing back against.
Gotcha. Yes. Right. So that's part of the point here, is that the modern people now who are really bristling and thinking James Linsday is public enemy number one, they're saying, why are we letting this self-admitted, leftist guy come in who's an atheist, by the way? And by the way, it's not just that he happens to be atheist. He's published books on why theism is stupid. Okay. And so, but he's very knowledgeable too. Like he did, Allie Beth Stuckey, is that her name? He did her podcast. That's why I'm so frustrated with James Linsday. When he's being well behaved, he's very intelligent and whatever. And sorry, I know I'm bouncing all over here, but I just want to underscore what you said. One of the points I made when I did that 2020 retrospective on the hoax is I said, this guy James Linsday is very intelligent. He's got a PhD in math, and he says in these interviews that he spent for a period there 80 hours a week delving into the literature. And then one of the things too is they said, what we would do is we would come up with the hypothesis, they said, we came up with, the thing we wanted to publish, like the thesis statement. And then we would go read the literature to see like the framework and the terminology and understand. And as I pointed out in my 2020 Bob Murphy Show episode, yeah, that's what it's called to publish in the academic literature. That's what you do. You have an idea, and then you read all the journal articles around that stuff and figure out, how do I get into this community? That's what it is to be in academia. You know what I mean? So that's not like they tricked anything. And then also, as I was doing more background research on this for this, our discussion now, Adam, critics at the time, one of them said something that resonated with me now, at least, is they said, this idea that they came up with their, crazy hoax idea or article and then got it through the defenses of the journal. He said, no, in some of the cases where the articles were accepted, the original submission was not published. It was a revise and resubmit, and the referees made suggestions, and the authors revised their manuscript in light of the feedback. So they said after a while, like the line between hoax article and, emergent paper from the community of scholars gets a little bit blurry, if you get what I'm saying, right? So, in other words, the original hoax that they intended, the referee said, no, we're not publishing that. You could make this more rigorous if you did X, Y, and Z. And so then they did do X, Y, Z, and then it got published. So, is that really a case of, aha, fooled you, when not, obviously. Again, you'd have to see the specifics. And like you said, Adam, too, and this is one of the points I made in my 20th, that it's not that these journals were publishing perfectly straightforward, reasonable things, except for the one nutty article these three slipped in. No, the whole field is nuts, right? So we didn't need them to say this field is nuts. We already knew that. And so the fact that, it was kind of like, but look how easily we got published. And like you said, well, no, James Linsday, if he spent 80 hours a week studying something, he's a very intelligent guy, and, he could get something published. I'm just to finish the train. The Allie Beth Stuckey, she's a very sweet, mild-mannered Christian conservative podcaster. And there was a point when she had James Linsday on, and he was talking about like church history and doctrine. And I didn't know he was an atheist at the time. I actually thought he was a Christian. He passed. and so that's what I'm saying. I was later shocked when I learned that he published stuff on atheism. So my point is, James is like anyway. So that's why I was so disappointed. But and I've completely lost the train of thought.
We were talking about definitions of.
Yes, thank you. So you can see what Dave Smith had in mind when he was using the woke. And I was saying right now the people bristling against James Linsday are like, oh yeah, this atheist comes in and he's throwing bombs and whatever, and he's just trying to shut us up with these labels or whatever. So there's a lot of people right now rejecting the whole idea, the attempt to codify what's the woke right. So when Dave was saying it, I didn't think that was silly. I understood exactly what he meant. And Dave's point wasn't to shut them up or something, but he was just saying, like, this is annoying. How can Ben Shapiro and guys like, and for people Dave wasn't exaggerating. There was, my favorite example was Thomas Massey said something like, hey, U.S. tax dollars should not be used to fund Israel bombing Christian kids in Gaza. Something like that. And what's his name? John Podhoretz retweeted that and said, he called it anti-Semitic filth. All right. It wasn't that Massey said, what's up with these, pointy-nosed Jews. He didn't say that. He just said U.S. tax dollars shouldn't be used to be blown up kids. I don't even know if he said Christian kids. Maybe I'm just adding it, but there was nothing, bigoted or pejorative or even edgy. It doesn't mean he's as sassy with Massey. This was not one of those. It was a straightforward U.S. tax dollars shouldn't be used to be blowing up kids in Gaza. And Potter, it didn't just say, I disagree strongly, Israel's our strongest. No, he called that anti-Semitic filth. So Dave saying, hey, that's the way the left fights with us. This is crazy. And especially coming from like Ben Shapiro and guys whose whole career was, your facts don't care about your feelings, and that unless, the feelings are Israel's our strongest ally and, the Holocaust was bad. And this is because that was the thing too, right? With the college campuses, it was, imagine how the Jewish students must feel to hear people saying from the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. You know what I mean? And so it was kind of just like, well, like who talks like that? That considering, how the words might be impacting college students. That's typically what the woke left do. And so that was Dave's point. So with that, I will read what James has in mind. And so this is James saying, the fact is the fact. A leading publication on the so-called woke right published the exact logical structure in much of the same language as Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto when it favored their conclusions. They can't cope their way out of that. And then Seth Dillon, the Babylon Bee guy, is totally in James's camp on this, and he retweeted that and said, James was able to trick these guys into publishing the Communist Manifesto because the woke right is a mirror image of the woke left. They use the same rhetoric, the same methods, the same grievance and identity framework. Their solutions differ, but their wokeness is identical. So I think they're making a valiant effort to show, no, these are the criteria that we're using. But again, I don't see, like if grievance is defined broadly enough to mean you think there are people that have done bad things and you want to stop them, that's kind of like in all politics, like everybody is engaged in grievance studies then, if that's how broadly we're going to use it. So that's kind of, how do you feel about it?
Well, first of all, it's hook-nosed Jews, not pointy-nosed Jews. And I don't want our fans to think that we're ignorant about racist tropes. So I got to correct you there.
Like I said, I was like, chapter 12 of Mein Kampf, I need to go review. I don't even remember which one that was. Yeah.
The Jews, I didn't even know he was interested in Jews. Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I'm tempted to think that, well, let me float up two hypotheses and you tell me which one you think is closer to actual reality. One hypothesis is that there's no such thing as anyone on the woke right, and there couldn't be because it's a contradiction in terms. Mm-hmm. But the other one, and maybe it's one I'm closer to or more sympathetic to, is that all humans are sort of susceptible to acting like woke douchebags when their little feelings get hurt. Like the October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel, it just blew up a bunch of people in our orbit and made them seem crazy because they have feelings. They have very deep felt feelings invested in the conflict and the people involved. And it sort of made them sort of throw out their principles and their so cerebral ways of communicating with one another. And they all got really testy. And maybe people are just like that. And Linsday was also complaining, that Tucker complains against America or something, or talks against America's interests. And it's sort of the same thing, right? Like maybe he's just emotionally connected with America. So anybody who ever says anything contrary or against America's interest, even if it's, a normal right-wing criticism of big government, maybe they just, they respond in a woke way or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I do see that. So here I'm going to extend the olive branch a little bit. I do think it's coherent. It might not be productive and a helpful exercise, but I think it's coherent to talk about a woke right. And like I said, the way Dave Smith did it, I totally got what he was saying and what his point was.
Me too.
And then even, so then James Linsday and, Constantine going after a different target. So I do get like the whole, America's always wrong, America last kind of thing.
Sure.
What they mean. But what's interesting is even there, Tucker Carlson is an America First guy.
Yeah, it doesn't.
You know what
land,
I mean? So it
doesn't land on Tucker or Candace. That's crazy.
But they're not. I get what they're trying to isolate, right? Where in any conflict, like the go-to is, how did the CIA cause this? Or I'm sure U.S. foreign policy in some way, you know, got the ball rolling and the dominoes falling for this. You know what I mean? Like there is that element on certain portions of the American right. And I get what they mean. Just like a typical leftist will, you know, always, when there's an issue, oh, it's colonialism. That's always the answer. Like, how come people in Africa are using machetes on each other? Oh, it's the Europeans' fault.
Well, let's put fine points on that then, because the 20-year-old blue-haired idiot on a college campus just reflexively goes, the entirety of America and Western civilization is evil for X and Y and Z reasons. And we say they're wrong. Whereas the reflexive, libertarian complaint about the CIA et al. Is that they're violating the principle of non-aggression. And that's why all the things that they do are inherently evil and lead to bad consequences. If you're a little bit fuzzy in your thinking, you look at those two examples and think they're the same. But I don't think they're the same. I think the blue-haired idiot on a college campus is wrong about her analysis. See how I made it a chick? It's because I'm misogynist. But we think that the analysis based on property rights and freedom of association and the non-aggression principle, we think that makes sense. Do you think that's a valid distinction, or are we all just puffing up our own egos?
Right. Also, you just take it as a given that someone with blue hair is, you know, wrong or a moron, and I think
or grandma,
you're not reflecting on your hair privilege. I would be happy to have a full head of blue hair at this point, right?
Oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
It would, you know what, that my eyes would really jump anyway.
I triggered you. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. It's microaggression. I need a safe space. So, yes, this is great. This episode, folks, where else can you get this discussion? We're really getting to the heart of this thing. I like that. And so let's go back to what Dave was saying. So my quick answer is, Adam, it certainly helps if the substance of the points is more accurate, but I could still understand someone objecting to just the overall rhetorical approach. So go back to, you know, Dave complaining and saying, guys, oh my gosh, if somebody just so much as criticizes Israel's military actions in Gaza, you bring up the Holocaust and say, no, by definition, Israel can't be committing genocide because they suffered the Holocaust. And then what if someone said, well, no, but I mean, we get what you're saying, Dave. We see the superficial similarity between, you know, American blacks who say if you criticize reparation payments, you must not care about the injustices of slavery historically, and how now if you're criticizing the IDF, someone bringing up the Holocaust. But don't you understand, the two are different, that the Holocaust was worse and it was more recent. So that's why it's not us being woke by doing it. We're just right. Whereas, you know, today's, the BLM protesters bringing up plantation slavery, I mean, that's just ancient history, man. So you see how, like, to me, that wouldn't really be answering it. It'd be like, no, it's still kind of like the form of the argument where you're using historical injustice, and it doesn't really matter whether it was 60 years ago or 200 years ago. That's not really the issue. So likewise, I would say here, let me answer you this way. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. I was asking Israel Kirzner one time what he thought of Murray Rothbard's History of Economic Thought, and he called it Marxist. Right? And I was like, whoa, what? And what he meant was Rothbard kind of comes at it like there's good guys and bad guys, and I guess we could say a class analysis. And this stuff came up. Lindsay actually, you know, retweeted Rothbard, a passage from Rothbard. I think it was a while ago, and someone resurrected it for this, this latest exchange. And Lindsay was saying, yeah, see, Murray Rothbard, you know, is I don't know if he used the word woke, but he was saying he's like a Marxist. It's just his enemies are different, right? And then people were like, well, yeah, classical liberal analysis looks at, like, you know, the state, the parasites or whatever, and, you know, Albert J. Nock and who's the other guy? Was it Franz Oppenheimer? I'm getting my giants mixed up. Engage in that sort of analysis. And yeah, it wasn't the capitalists versus the proletariat. It was, you know, the state rulers versus the ruled. And so I do I'm somewhat sympathetic to that. Just like Israel Kirzner, when he wasn't saying Rothbard was a bad economist, just like Karl Marx was. He just meant, though, that the approach to history, in his mind, he didn't like the method that was being used, where, we're going to just say, like, there's the good guys and the bad guys, and that's how we're going to tell the story. Let me just read on this.
Before we move on from that, didn't Hans Hermann Hoppe sort of defend Rothbard and essentially Marxian analysis by just saying, yeah, Marx got who the oppressor and who the oppressed are wrong definitionally, but it's correct when you're defining them as who is using political power against another person. That's just a more correct way to orient the axis of oppression.
Yes, he did do that, and and I know like Tom Woods was jumping in on this recent thing and just saying, I'm sorry, James Linsday is completely ignorant of the fact that there's a long tradition in classical liberalism that approaches things this way. And let me just say here, so James Linsday tweeted out, and he goes, the middle paragraph is them admitting my whole point, Jim. He's talking against some guy, Jim. I don't know. I don't have it here. It's the method they agree with, the woke method. All right. And so here, what he screenshot was the editor's note once of this, online website. I guess if it's a website, it's online. This online publication that is Christian nationalism, where the James Linsday was saying, the leading one that I've never heard of, and he got them to publish this thing that was ostensibly a rewrite of the Communist Manifesto, and so everyone's going, what are you talking about? And so this is what the editor said once they realized what had happened. All right, and it kind of proves both points depending on what you want to say. So editor's note. The following article was written by James Linsday, who, as an avowed atheist, is not eligible for publication in American Reformer. Right, so American Reformer is the name of their journal or whatever. It's online. However, Mr. Linsday originally submitted this article under the name Marcus Carlson. Linsday used a passage of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, stripping out its ideological substance, but retaining its powerful rhetorical structure. This was intended as a hoax, but is seemingly poorly conceived, given the undeniable power of Marx's rhetorical approach, as Linsday himself acknowledged. While we were unaware of its authorship and motive, it is still a reasonable aggregation of some new right ideas, and new right, the N and the R are capitalized, repackaged into Marx's effective rhetoric, and we have corrected its authorship to properly credit Mr. Linsday, blah, 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 and they go on. So they kind of, I think they handled it well. They just basically did what I said with the math journal. Like if somebody submitted a valid proof and then said, I don't believe in this technique, the editors said, well, it's still a valid proof, and, we're just going to, we might put an editor's note saying the author intended this as a hoax, but we're going to leave it. And that's kind of what they're doing. Like, no, this is good. So in James Linsday's defense, I understand why he thinks this is, point, set, and match. That, guys, they just admitted they agree with Marx's effective rhetorical structure. It's just the particular villains and allies are different. And that's what he's trying to say. So I think that was an admission of not so much defeat, but that is what James was trying to prove.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Good, because I'm going to ask you 3.
Well, you didn't ask that.
Damn it, 4. The you just used as a delineator historical oppression as versus, I guess, oppression. How long until it's historical? I mean, if I got beat up last Tuesday, am I just wallowing in the past and embracing historical oppression if I'm, I still am carrying the bruises? What does that even mean, Is that a term that's definable?
I mean, it would be arbitrary.
Yeah.
If you did. That's a good question. And it does kind of go back to Dave on his podcast was
I'm sorry, before you
Yes.
I bring that up because what if I'm in the middle of getting beat up now? Is it some sort of a leftist Marxian analysis to point at 2 people and saying one is victim and one oppressor? Are these just automatically stupid ways to talk about things just because they're, quote, leftist?
Right. If you're getting beaten up by a blue-haired 20-year-old college chick, that's on you.
I'm glad I have finally a space that I can talk about it. I don't feel good about it. I tried to call for help, but my voice.
Yeah, what I know what it was. It was my pacifism arguments on the Contra
That's right.
cruise that you
That's
took to
right.
heart and didn't realize that was going to be awkward.
On the day, I thought you were wrong, but I didn't lift a finger against that lady, a blue-haired harpy.
Okay, yeah, so good point. And with all this stuff, again, folks, we're just trying to flesh the things out. There's no conclusions here. We're just considerations and explorations. You're right. At some point, it is like to say, oh, a grievance study. Well, yeah, if there's a sense in which like a court, a trial is a grievance study, and that doesn't mean it's stupid. And what are you, a leftist? You
right?
Oh, this guy killed my kid. I think I should sue him.
Cry
I
me a
understand
river,
what you're
lefty.
saying. Right. Again, it's with this stuff. What I like about this is I'm glad James Linsday did this, because I think it was very revealing that the recoiling of people and saying, oh, when he gets, wait a minute, that wasn't really the Communist Manifesto. Look how much he changed that up. Whereas none of us went and bothered to do that with the Feminist Journal. And then when we did go to do it, I thought, geez, if we're not going to say he tricked them into publishing the Communist, they certainly didn't get tricked into publishing Mein Kampf. So I like that element of it, where I just want people to be consistent. So you're right. If we're going to say it's not crazy for us to look at the world in terms of the oppressor and the oppressed is a general rule, well then, yeah, if we're upset, like, geez, you left it, everything with you guys is always about, the white supremacy versus that, it's not so much that, what is it with you guys? It's just more, no, you happen to be mistaken in the particulars. You get what I mean? And so I just would ask for consistency. But let me say, I have noticed, for example, the, we have this thing like, oh yeah, these Marxists, oh my gosh, like everything's ideological to them. Like that's how they go around and look at the world. But then every Super Bowl, there's a bunch of libertarians who'll be like, ooh, it's the sports ball and blah, blah. Meanwhile, the CIA's murdering people in Africa. And you stupid boobs just watching your circus, and whatever, getting your fish or your bread and circuses.
Bread, yep.
Yes, there you go. That's some kind of reference. I've read through cities or something. Right. So you get, and to me, that's just obnoxious and annoying.
Yeah.
And so I do notice that. And also too, the squabbling, you see these Marxist groups and fighting of the Trotskyites versus this and the Mensheviks and the Bolshevik. And then we have the guy I really like to argue with is George Selgin, because he's so wrong on banking. Right. And so you can see, you kind of step back and, it's like, oh no, but our intra-libertarian disputes are really important. Whereas those idiot Marxists, don't they understand they're all just a bunch of commies and they're all just stupid and they should just stop arguing with each other because they're just wrong. You know what I mean? And you realize, well, that's what we look like to them. Anyway, yeah. I'm at one with the universe at this point. My enlightenment is Buddha-esque levels.
It's enough to make you think the only reason we invented language is to go, I'm better than you are. Neener. I have not a question, but just an observation to see what you think about it. When I was listening to Linsday on trigonometry, he was at one point criticizing Tucker for like being almost anti-America or something, which I think is a ridiculous claim, but whatever. It sounded like he was saying almost like, how can Tucker think he's a serious person when we have all these legitimate enemies to be fighting and you're sitting there sniping it, blah, 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 America's wrong. Why would you shoot your ally in the foot when you should be training all your weapons completely downrange to fight the bigger? Did you catch that sense, or am I just hallucinating?
I don't think I heard what you're saying. I can totally imagine him saying that. I actually don't think I heard the particular clip that you're talking about.
Hey, I hallucinate sometimes.
No,
I'm admitting it now.
That sounds plausible, but I didn't watch much of his thing on trigonometry. I only heard, when Dave Smith did his takedown of it and played clips. That's really what I heard. I didn't go and independently watch that thing.
That's all I heard too.
And you reminded me of that's partly what Dave's one of his main points was when he was like, oh, this is just stupid. Where James was again trying to like say, oh, if your political movement has a grievance that is based on, examples of historical oppression, therefore you are woke, and therefore you're woke right. And Dave, like you said, he's been saying, Dave's point was every political movement,
Of course.
is against the bad guy. You know what I mean? What are you talking about? Like then everybody's woke if that's what you're going to use. Like that's too open-ended. So I understand what they're both saying. And like I said, I don't think it's crazy. I get the argument that, oh yeah, there's a sense in which some libertarian types engage in oppressor-oppressed analysis. But like you say, oppression is real. You know what I mean? It's not that it's an empty thing. And, oppression's not just real, but it's bad. And we should oppose it. And so, and maybe part of it is, like you're saying, okay, if it's ongoing right now, then we need to stop it. Whereas if it's something that's ancient history, in particular, I guess also the problem, it's not like when I was in 5th grade, I didn't know about slavery, right? So this whole idea that, Donald Trump and his allies in, what's the governor of Florida's name?
DeSantis,
the recent bills, they don't want kids to learn about slavery. Like, get out of here. That's not what the opposition to, critical studies and all that stuff is, critical race theory and whatever. No, it's, teaching, and the way we're going to rectify that is if you're white right now, realize you're part of the problem. There's systemic race. You get the idea that's what the issue was. So I can see, it might be a bit sloppy to say people right now who want to have what is it called, reverse racism, to make up for that. And if the way we're saying that's wrong because you're just doing this victimizer mentality, and maybe we should be a bit more nuanced, that, like you say, if there's a serial rapist on the loose, I want the cops to be going after the victimizer and interviewing the victims to say, what does the guy look like? It's not that they're being woke by doing that. What is true, though, is it should be... I
can't give you a description. Yeah. That would be profiling.
Yes. You know what? But it wasn't a bear. It was a man.
That's right, ladies.
So, yeah. So anyway, I think we're making substantive points here, even though we don't necessarily have conclusions. But
I do have one weird question to tack on here at the end.
Can I say something before you say that? Let me just mention. I'm sorry, real fast.
Yeah.
I do think Dave was basically saying, not basically, he did say explicitly, guys, this whole stuff with James Linsday is another example where people keep telling me, James used to be so good, and no, he just always sucked. And I don't think that's true. Like, I really liked James, not for the hoax stuff. Like I said, I was almost squeamish about, oh, geez, I kind of poo-pooed the hoax thing, because then later I was very impressed when he did his like encyclopedia of postmodernism. I forget what the title was, but he went and read all of that Gramsci and all this stuff and would speak very knowledgeably about, this is how the other side thinks. You know what I mean? Like, kind of like know your enemy and whatever. And that's what I liked about him. In other words, he spent weeks, delving into their stuff and then synthesizing it and then coming and reporting back to us about this is what they're doing and this is why they, they call it Afro-American, and then they called it this, and they keep changing the blah, 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 and so that's what I liked about him, that he was so fair to the other side. And then that's why I'm so disappointed when he, calls Dave stupid, and he was making fun of Tom Woods. And then with me, this is my personal grievance. James wrote some stuff against, what he called national divorce. And I did a whole episode, I think it was the Human Action podcast, going through point by point of his essay. Very politely, I praised him, for 3 minutes at the front end, and then just went through. And James retweeted that and just said, LOL. That was his response to me. And I was just like, maybe I'm wrong, but no, that's the best critique you are going to get on this. And so, no, it doesn't help anybody for you just to dismiss me like this isn't even, So that's why I was so frustrated with him, that he's just blowing people off that are not lightweights. And so, I think he's sharp. And I think Dave overstepped when he just said, no, this guy always sucked, or whatever word he used. Anyway. Okay. Sorry. What were you going to say?
LOL. That's a good one. It's like I said before, when you have a valuable nerd and he does something right, you don't heap praise upon him. You say, nice job. And you give him a cookie, and then you call him a nerd and give him a wedgie. You got to maintain it's how we operationalize our nerds in this country, Bob. All right. I do have a question that I think is important. It's not on topic, but it's within sight anyway. As a religious fellow yourself, how do you feel about wokeism and other elements of leftism, but principally wokeism, being referred to as a religion, or at least sharing many common elements of organized religion? Does that seem like is it an offensive description, or do you think it's on point? Does it have any merit? What do you think about that?
Oh, it's certainly not offensive, because the idea, is to say, oh yeah, these like communist or environmentalism is a good one. Like radical environmentalism, I think, is a religion for some people.
I do too. Yeah.
And so it's not offensive, because the point is coming from someone on the right saying that, who's a believer. Yeah, they're everybody. You have a God-sized hole in your heart, right, and you can fill it with God, or you can go and have booze and women and chasing money, or saving the planet. And so yeah, there's a lot of superficial similarities. That there's the original sin that mankind is pillaging the earth. We need to do penance, right? That's why the radical environmentalists, if you come up with a technological solution, like, oh, we could just put some mirrors up into space and reflect the light, or we could just do this, Freeman Dyson show, we could just genetically modify trees and plant those and suck the carbon. They don't like that. No, it has to be, we rapidly, dial down consumption. We need to be punished. We need to suffer for our sins against Mother Earth. There's that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you can't use science to get yourself out of original sin. That's not how it works.
Right. There has to be some pay. Like someone must pay the price for this, kind of deal. Right. So yeah, there's a lot of those elements, and there's others too that right now off the top of my head I can't come up with. I've seen people make that case, and I found it very compelling. It gives us a sense of solidarity or whatever. We're part of this movement, something bigger than ourselves. We're saving the planet, and just like you can't reason with a fundamentalist Christian and just show him that, well, no, we clearly, have a common ancestor here, and, evolution and, Genesis is wrong. That's not going to work, because it's a religious thing for them, and arguing, with a radical environmentalist, you're not going to get anywhere. Right. So I get all that. And yes, I think that's a very useful way of looking at it. And also just more generally, radical Marxists, likewise, that they're, for at least some of them, I think it is a religion to them, and it's their identity, and it's all their, their sense of justice in the world and everything like that. And that's what their motivating principle is. That's the primary lens through which they view everything. Just like with a Bible believing Christian, that, should be how you view everything.
Yeah. And if you tried to talk them out of it, or said there's anything wrong with that analysis, they'd look at you as a heretic or
right
blasphemer. All right. Well, this has been great. You got anything else you want to put a cherry on top for us?
I'm looking over my notes here. Yeah, I had one. Oh, yes, I have some screenshots of tweets. So you asked about the definition. James Linsday at one point said, people have been craving a simple definition, so woke right, noun. So he's being funny, like making modern day fascists in exactly the same way the woke left is modern day communists. Okay, so he's, and people can take that for what. So I appreciate that at least he's being specific now.
I don't think that woke leftism is communist in nature. It's identitarian.
Right, but I think that's what he's getting at here. In fairness to James,
he thinks.
I think he's saying again. I'll read it again. I don't mean it. That sounded very patronizing.
That's fine.
Listen, Adam. Woke right, noun. Modern day fascists in exactly the same way the woke left is modern day communists. So he's admitting, yeah, Tucker Carlson and his fans aren't fascists, but by the same token, the blue-haired college chick, although arguably some of them are communists, but they're not, many of them actually aren't literal communists. It's just, if you call them commies and then you say, well, what do you mean by that? And the person spelled it out, he's saying, okay, right. And so, a lot of these Christian nationals where they're not literally fascists, but if you give me the flexibility that you're going to call these people commies, I can call them fascists with just as much validity.
In your next conversation with Elon, you're going to have to get him to put in a special font for sarcasm and pedantry. And this is how we can read these things in a certain tone of voice, because otherwise, fools like me, I'm just not going to get it.
Yeah. Let me do one more. I grabbed another screenshot of a tweet. This is Michael Naya. He was going through this thread talking about what do we mean by the woke right? And he says, its intellectual roots are vast, drawing on thinkers like James Burnham, Carl Schmitt, Samuel Francis, Jacques Ellul, I don't know how I'm saying that guy, and Alexis de Tocqueville, among others. The entire canon of the theoretical left is also fair game to be broken down for spare parts. And then he cited this guy, Patrick Deneen, and he has a quote from him saying, we can draw from Marxist analysis without reaching Marxist conclusions. And then also, Rothbard has a quote somewhere where he says something like, I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he says something like, libertarians are 95% theory and 5% strategy, and the Marxists are, or maybe he said communists, I don't remember, are 5% theory and 95% strategy. And Rothbard's point was we should be a little bit more on strategy. Like, in other words, yes, our theory is awesome. We're so much better, but we're just sitting around writing books for each other, whereas, the commies are taking over the, how did they do that? And so we got to, anyway. So there is that element. And so if James Lindsay and some others are saying, hey guys, you're kind of borrowing the tools of the leftists here, and maybe we shouldn't do that. Maybe that's the ring of power that's going to corrupt us. We can talk about the specific instances, and is that a fair thing to say? But I don't think he's insane for talking like that in general. I can understand why that might, raise his alarm bells.
I wasn't aware he was making that point. I'd be more sympathetic if I thought he was.
And that's partly why, why doesn't he just, they don't even have to have a debate, but he's just refusing to talk to Dave Smith.
Maybe that's what he meant by LOL, was all that beautiful stuff about the ring of power. And I just were too stupid to get it.
It was like it was not encryption. What is, when you pack it together, what is that called?
I do know what you mean, but I can't come up with it.
Compression? Is that the word I want?
It's compression. Yeah, data compression.
He put it in a zip file.
All right. Well, I think we've covered all our bases. If you are listening or watching this on Heyman Nature, God bless you, but you should check out the Bob Murphy Show at bobmurphyshow.com.
Mm-hmm.
And if the vice is versa, please come check me out on YouTube at Heyman Nature, Haman, and also my Substack, HeymanNature.substack.com. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Adam. Always a pleasure.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.